Hello fellow music lovers, welcome to episode 50 of What Makes This Song Special. The show where every week I take a different song, I'll link it to a story, a song that reminds me of an event or a time in my life, and I'll then leave you with a little clickbait somewhere at the end of the video where you can listen to my cover version of today's song. The story this week goes back to about 1984, 85. I've got a really weird ability to remember things from really far back in my childhood, so we're going back to maybe I'm 3 years old in this story. I think I sometimes freak people out with memories that I have and really specific details, and I suppose that's probably why I started doing this show 50 episodes ago. Now, memories are often triggered for me by hearing a song, as they are, I'm sure, for many of you. And, you know, I'm right back in that moment when I hear a song. I can be right back in the moment. I can sort of smell perfumes and remember what I was wearing at the time and things like that. Really kind of specific details. So, so we were living in a top flat or top apartment in Shawlands in the south side of Glasgow. My mum and dad had a newsagents in the corner of Kilmarnock Road and Trefoil Avenue. And it was called the Handy Stores, and anyone and everyone who was in Shawlands at the time knew my mum and dad. And we lived next door to my gran and papa, who also had lived there most of their lives too. So everybody knew our family. And I was this little kid. I was maybe, as I said, 3, maybe 4 years old. And everybody kind of knew me. My mum and dad worked long hours in the shop. And because I wasn't old enough to go to school yet, Mum would often split her time between working in the shop and hanging out with me. And I'd often be in the shop as well with my mum and dad, and all the customers would be coming, giving me lots of attention, sort of cooing over the little newcomer to the gang. So I can't remember if it was like a set day every week or just a random day every week, but around once a week, me and my mum would go to Costa Coffee in Glasgow Central Station for a wee date. She'd get a coffee, I'd get an Orangina with bits. It was always Orangina with bits, for anybody that remembers Orangina. I don't know if that's even a thing anymore, Orangina. And we'd both get a panettone or a slice of panettone. And at that time, I think that might have been, I think it was the only Costa in Glasgow, maybe even in the only Costa in Scotland at that point, I'm not sure. It was a great wee place. A real kind of slice of Italy, good coffee, Italian cakes. It just shows you how scaling a business like that to an enormous chain doesn't maintain quality, because Costa has very little that's really Italian about it anymore. The coffee isn't very good. You get 2 or 3 shots of espresso in a small cappuccino. It basically just plays into people's addictions nowadays, sadly. But back then, the coffee, according to my mum and dad, was decent. It was good coffee. It wasn't easy to get good coffee in Britain back then. You know, like, we're talking 35, almost 40 years ago. It's only really in the last decade or so that it's become easy to get good food and drink in general in Britain. Maybe not drink, but, you know, coffee. Good food and good coffee is something that was really hard. We struggled. It was just as well both my mum and dad are excellent cooks, because you just couldn't get great Italian food anywhere in Glasgow back then, especially pizza. So anyway, we would always go in there once a week for a wee hangout, a wee date, and a wee slice of Italy, as I said. And we would drive in to Glasgow city centre, park under the railway station, the central station, and we'd go into Costa for our treat. And we'd sometimes take dominoes or a wee card game like Snap or something, and we would watch the world go by, and we'd go for a wander in town, and Mum would quite often buy me like a toy car or something, or a wee figure. And in the car journey, my mum had bought this cassette tape at the time. It was called Their Very Best Back to Back, Diana, Michael, Gladys, Stevie. A very long title for a tape. And it was basically 6 songs from each artist, and the artists were Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, Gladys Knight, and Stevie Wonder. So yeah, 24 songs, 6 from each of 4 different amazing artists. And it was brilliant. The songs were amazing. I could have picked any of them for today's episode. They all remind me of that time. And we would often meet my gran and papa when we got back to go for a walk in Pollock Estate. There was one time I remember we got back and we went up to our apartment, and as we approached the last set of stairs before we went up, my mum saw something that obviously alerted her, and she stopped and took me by the hand, and we ran back down the stairs and outside. And what happened was there was like, I think, 2 burglars in our house. They'd managed to get into the attic of the flats and then cut a hole in the ceiling and down into our house. They took my mum's cameras and jewellery and some other things. Absolute scumbags. But anyway, I digress. But I suppose, yeah, just times like that. It reminds me, the good and bad times, I suppose. There's always the wee bad time in there. But I suppose those songs from the tape in the car remind me of just lots of events from that time in my life. The old people in Shawlands who'd known my family for decades, the customers that would come into my mum and dad's shop and give me sweeties and chocolate and sometimes money. And we moved to a house in Clarkston, not far away from there, but not long after that, and it was a bit more of a suburban area. So I suppose those songs remind me of that time living in Shawlands, and my grandparents, my mum and dad's old shop, simple times when everything was just kind of perfect and you're just a kid and you've got no worries. And it sort of makes me think of my own kids now as well. There's this line. So today's song, the one I picked, was "The Way We Were" by Gladys. It's an amazing song, and she says at the beginning that the version was a live version. It was on this tape, and at the very beginning she sort of speaks a bit before she starts to sing, and she said something like, you see, what did she say? She said something like, everybody's talking about the good old days, something along those lines. And even then, people were talking about the good old days. And I think of then as the good old days, but obviously people then thought of even further back as the good old days. And I think at the beginning she says something like, as bad as we think they are, these will become the good days for our children. And I love that. I really hope that my kids grow up and look back at their childhood in the way that I look back at mine, with great memories, surrounded by love and attention and feeling like the centre of the universe, which I certainly did. And the song, "The Way We Were," it's just all wrapped up in that question: was everything better then, or do you choose to sort of remember the best bits? I think maybe a bit of both. Let me know what you think in the comments, of course, as always. Obviously there are many versions of this song, with Barbra Streisand's being the original and most famous one, but there were versions from Andy Williams, Bing Crosby, Doris Day, but the version I grew up on, as I said, was the Gladys Knight version. The woman had soul. I mean, what a voice. She sang like she was giving you a picture of her whole life. All the good, all the bad, it was sort of written all over her voice. A beautiful, slow vibrato, great range, power, tone, charisma. And she's still singing like an absolute goddess at I think she's 79 now or something like that. So just phenomenal, just amazing. So there's my wee short story this week. A very short one this week, but a wee, the story behind the song, or the song behind the story. Before school came along and ruined everything, I was just chilling out with my mum and dad, the coolest newcomer to the south side. Just a wee dude having a great time with no worries, eating panettone, drinking Orangina, listening to some Motown classics in the car with my mum, and having a great time. So there's my wee story. I will leave you with a part 2 clickbait for my cover version this week of Gladys Knight, "The Way We Were." I hope you enjoy it. I hope you've enjoyed the story. Please, if you love music and if you love silly stories about songs and nostalgia and memories, hit subscribe, give it a wee share, give it a wee like, and I'll see you next week for another song and another story. Thank you.